Daniela and Eric.
Okay, John.
It's so good to see you.
I'm so glad you're doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eric, please,
Okay.
over here. So Eric, you were here at MIT in May, and we had such a nice talk about a range of topics in computer science with our students. I'm so delighted to welcome you back, and
I was also here, by the way, with the IDE Inclusive Innovation Challenge.
That's right, that's right.
Which is a very big deal that MIT is driving.
So I am very happy to welcome you today to talk about artificial intelligence and jobs. So let's talk AI. All right, so I want to start with a question about your early days. You were working on your PhD thesis in the 70s, and at some point you came across the idea of AI. I wonder if you remember that moment and what you thought about it then.
Well, many people were working on AI in the 1970s, and of course, we should give credit to MIT for inventing all this stuff, so thank you. And it was at the time more linguistics-based, and ultimately most of the theories didn't pan out, right, for one reason or another. They got very complicated, the computers couldn't support them, but I was always interested in it.
So, so of course, I think you've changed your mind about whether AI was going to help us or whether it was not powerful enough to do much for us.
I think what happens in life is, you know, you have these experiences and somehow they form your opinion about something, perhaps unfairly. And so Larry Page, of course, had studied AI when he was at Stanford and was promoting various AI projects, and I was always very skeptical. So nevertheless, we did a series of initiatives, and deep learning came along, which was clearly beneficial to us in our ad system and some of our vision work. But it really wasn't until the unsupervised learning experience with YouTube, where what we did is we sort of set a set of computers out to sort of see what they would discover watching YouTube. And you know, you would assume that when you're busy discovering things, you're discovering something fundamental. And our system, in an unsupervised way, discovered the most important thing that you can discover on YouTube, which is the concept of a cat, because there were so many videos of cats on YouTube. I wish I could tell you that we had made a more fundamental discovery. We take our jobs very seriously, but you know, the facts are the facts, and history will record this as our failure. But nevertheless, 2012, that really kicked it off, and that team became the basis of what we have now. It's internally Google called Google Brain, which is a very, very large team working on many of these technologies.
So that's really such a great project, Google Brain. Now I want to bring you back to the topic of AI and jobs. Just a few minutes back, Moshe and I were disagreeing about whether AI kills or does not kill jobs. You have said that data does not support the idea of AI as a huge job killer. I wonder if what the main data points you've looked at were.
Well, first place, every wave of technology has had this conversation. And I can remember this occurring with mechanization in the Midwest and so forth and so on. If you look today, we support far more jobs here in the United States with obviously better economic growth than we had 20 years ago. So the presumption is that existing jobs are lost. And the problem is you can't then imagine the other jobs that are created. And Brynjolfsson and McAfee and others here have made the argument very strongly that, remember, AI is not replacing jobs, it's replacing tasks. So if we sort of take that as a framing, let's think about what's really going to happen. What's really going to happen is we're going to have a surplus of jobs and not enough people to fill them because of demographics. Because one thing that you all have not solved here at MIT is declining fertility of the world, right? And we actually depend on people, right? And we've all grown up with this notion that the world was overpopulated, but in fact the inverse is probably going to end up being true. But for all sorts of reasons, it looks like the number of jobs in aggregate that will be empty will be increasing, not decreasing. The simplest way to see this, and John was mentioning this earlier, the peak, the current estimate for population growth in China peaks at 2031. approximately, and then because of the one-child policy and other reasons, begins to decline. The same is already true in Japan and Korea. In order to grow their productivity, they're going to have to automate, because that's the only way we know of to get people to be more productive. We can't have them work longer hours. People are dying from overwork in those countries. So the combination of all of that says you're going to have to increase automation. Notice that these are the leading countries, that are rushing to automate for that very reason.
So on that topic, what do you see is, as the role of companies and universities in thinking about the consequences of technology as we develop workers, as we train students?
Well, we spent a lot of time on this, as many other folks know. That's what the purpose of this conference is. What I would really like is for the Inclusive Innovation Challenge that MIT started to be a global phenomenon with hundreds and hundreds of organizations pushing very, very hard on this. And the reason is that technical groups, especially startups, tend to sort of focus on a very narrow problem because that's what they're able to pull off in a lot of time, they have a lot of money. But what we really need is the application of this technology to make the average person happier, more productive, happier with their life, and so forth and so on. And often people build tools for themselves or their local markets or whatever. So I am absolutely convinced that done properly, making everyone smarter is a net economic gain for society. I defy you to argue with me in the abstract, right? That it's better to have dumb people rather than smarter people. It just seems like a crazy argument. And so if you think of Google as a strategy to give free access to every person on the planet, which is our objective, to all the information that they could possibly ever consume, that has to be good, right, at some level. There are problems with it. You know, some of the information is not the right one, and there are errors and lies and so forth and so on. But in aggregate, making people smarter, right, has to be a good thing. This is an educational institution. You clearly believe this.
Absolutely, but we already have that. So we already have Google with information available to all.
Well,
so what should we do?
Well, first place, less than half the world's population is available. Less than half the world's population is connected. So starting with that.
Yes, I mean.
So there's all sorts of challenges like that, which are separate. From the standpoint of companies, we are sufficiently concerned about this that we've announced essentially a Google for Work project, where we're going to donate $1 billion over 5 years to causes that are fundamentally about education, retraining, getting people ready for the digital revolution, and so forth. My personal view, and I think the corporation's view, is that the governments are not doing enough. The governments are fundamentally reactive. They tend to react to the current needs of the current voters. But you can see these challenges coming. You can see, when you look at the gap, the sort of generation gap between a 15-year-old and a 50-year-old, or whatever metaphor you want, you can see the difference. And we need to get people in aggregate ready for this.
So I think the Grow with Google program is really inspiring. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about it. Are there specific sectors that you're targeting? Are there other priorities beyond what you told us so far?
There are various plans. So one of the requirements is that Googlers will donate 1 million hours of time themselves into this, and so we've committed to doing that as well, which is a big enough company we can actually do that, believe it or not. And I think the biggest focus is on digital skill building. So over and over again, what we hear is that people don't really know how to use these tools. Now, everybody here knows how to use them. Everybody here knows how to use a website and so forth. And if I asked you to create a small business, you could do it very quickly. But most people can't. They find the tools, even in their current relatively easier state, still too hard. They're still not simple. And so we're helping them there.
So what should we do together, universities and companies? For instance, I really like the idea of computer literacy. I really think that if we start training students in computational thinking and computational making, and we consider that part of literacy, then in 10 years' time, we will have people who will be prepared and ready. So is that a solution, or are we missing other?
Well, what I would like from the educational side is I'd like everybody to focus on new forms of digital learning. And there's lots of evidence that people learn in different ways. that the traditional model that we all grew up with has competitors. You can now test these learning models by measuring retention and other kinds of things. So I'd like to see the educational establishment, which seems to, the only people who seem to be innovating are computer scientists, right, applied to education rather than education themselves, which is an issue in and of itself. If you take a look, for example, the edX initiative that was done here, right, it's been hugely successful, right? So we know these models are working. I'd like to see those initiatives scaled at a national and global level. That would have a big impact because then you have enough data and enough training data that you can begin to actually analyze these. I'm worried that much of what the smart people in the top educational institutions are doing does not have enough data to actually be prescriptive, if you will, for national and global level solutions. And I'm referring now to the training mechanisms. A typical example is how long should the online session be? What kind of questions do you have? How do you do interactive learning?
So I think if we do all these things in 10 years' time, we will be in a totally different place with the students we graduate. But in the meantime, we have a wide workforce. We have all levels of jobs and engagements. And some people are feeling overwhelmed by the rapid pace of acceleration of technology. In fact, I recently read Thomas Friedman's book, Thank You for Being Late, where he talks about dislocation and how this is actually impacting people's sense of confidence and security. What should we do for these people?
Well, what's interesting is, you know, we always complain about everything changing so quickly. Imagine being alive in the early 1900s. The combination of the automobile, electricity, manufacturing, industrial prowess, World War I, the invention of airplanes, the invention of military weapons, and so forth. We've been through even larger amounts of change. We're just complaining more now. And I think we're complaining more because we're better connected. And complaining is fine, by the way. But the human society is very adaptable, especially against the right kind of principles and with the right kind of leadership. And it seems to me pretty obvious that if we can set down a set of principles about what we really care about, people will get along. The American model, right, is incredibly flexible. And as you heard from Kai-Fu, who I've worked with for a long time today, China has a different model, and they're going to come at this problem in a different way. And ultimately, the challenge of the American model versus the Chinese model in everything, right, will come to dominate our lives for the rest of our lives, just because the scale that they operate at and the scale that we operate at. So we might as well get our act together, right, as a nation and as a society and say we better embrace this. And that takes leadership from the top, which is typically missing in America, and certainly now, additional funding for universities in these areas, and a whole bunch of things that I suspect we all agree on.
So, let's talk a little bit about talent. Google hires a lot of our students.
Thank you very much.
And they are very happy
Please
to come
continue.
and work with you. What should we do? What should companies and the government do to help retain the talent in the U.S.?
Well, the first and most obvious thing to do is don't kick them out. I mean, the immigration battle today, it is literally insane. And of course, the government has actually done insane things, so I shouldn't say it's a unique ability to take one of your top PhD students and then kick him or her out of the country and send them off to something else where they'll build their lives and perhaps ultimately compete with us in a business context or perhaps in a military context. I'd much rather have them be in America. I'd much rather have them here, and I'd like to have them working for Google. So we're clear. So that just strikes me as self-harm, and I want to call it that way. This is self-harm. We're hurting ourselves. If you frame this as the battle against the other great countries that are going to be competing, which include China, and of course Russia has a major strategy here, which they've announced, and again, I'll take them at their word that they intend to dominate and obliterate everybody else in this regard, let alone the Europeans and so forth. So you get the idea. That's point number one. I think point number two is that we're beginning to see the very top students are choosing computer science, machine learning, and AI, which I'm very proud of. Often, you know, you'd have these incredibly polymath students and they would do physics or math. And now the field has gotten so interesting that we're able, again, through your leadership here and in other examples, which I'm very, very excited about, we need more of those kinds of people. One of the problems, and you know this because you teach it, is a lot of the stuff is still very much a black art. We can't explain how some of the algorithms work. We can't explain exactly how they fail. If you can't describe exactly how something works and exactly how something fails, you can't put it in life-critical situations. It's a real limit to where the technology can go, right? Ultimately, people are not going to accept that. Now, there are various workarounds and solutions and so forth, but I'll give you an example. In hanging around with the AlphaGo people, who are beyond brilliant, a group that started out of Cambridge and is based in London now as part of DeepMind, you talk to them about how they actually did the Go game, and it took them 2 years to build the AI algorithms to build the learning model that took 7 days to learn the game. So I used to say, well, this AI stuff is so powerful, you don't have to program. You can just let the computer learn stuff, okay? But the learning is the programming. And what the data is that now your students coming right out of MIT with a little bit of work and some of the TensorFlow and other tools that are available can build a mashup to do incredibly powerful systems. But real systems that humans are going to rely on aren't going to be built that way. They're going to be engineered, they're going to be thought through, they're going to be programming, and that skill is still a PhD, brilliant person kind of skill that we need more of those kinds of people. It's still it's still a unique skill at the moment. We have built a library called AutoML, which is an attempt to generalize this. So when you and I spoke last, when I spoke last year, I talked a little bit about this. We think that we need a couple more things to happen. We think we need another factor of 10 or 100 of computational power ahead of us. And with that, we think that we can begin to do, essentially generate the models, generate the neural networks, and then test them out. So think of it as a meta layer of generation. And that's interesting, right? We think that'll be very productive. And then the third thing, of course, is we need a network and a database of the knowledge that is being generated. And the simplest way to understand that is that this lady over here is teaching a self-driving car to turn left, and she teaches it to turn left. And this gentleman over here is has his car and is teaching it to turn right. And so she has a car that can turn left, and he has a car that turns right. So they're kind of unhappy, except one can go left and one can go right. What's interesting about that is after that's done, the two cars can exchange the knowledge. That's something humans can't do. So there's reasons to think that if we can build a knowledge platform of these kinds of specific tasks, we may be able to build up to a much more powerful layer than we think.
So transfer learning is extraordinarily powerful, but today's machines don't have common sense. How do we get there?
I'm not sure that common sense is the first goal, because common sense is judgment, and judgment takes a long time. So you're going to have an awful lot of training data, right, to ultimately train for common sense. We will eventually get there, but at the moment, the algorithms are so different from the way humans actually work that it's better to understand them as sort of working with humans rather than replacing humans. There's this term called cobot, right, which is sort of robot plus their cooperator, working together where the human and the robot has been trained to work with that human, right, and makes that human more powerful, right, more extensible. And that's a more likely path.
So that's certainly the path that I, as a roboticist, want to embrace. But going back to AI and to getting AI systems to be more like humans, I wonder if you are working on building general AI systems that mimic human thinking.
Well, we're not there yet. There is a project inside of DeepMind to try to advance general intelligence at a research level. And the core idea here is to try to develop how do you build the knowledge base along the lines that I'm describing. But the vast majority of work that we're doing is more of the specialized kind. In our industry, there's so much training data and there's so many opportunities to improve our performance. That's the low-hanging fruit. And now we're in the healthcare space. And in healthcare, it's wide open. The scale of impact for healthcare is hard to describe.
So I have to leave some time for the audience to ask questions, but I do want to squeeze one more question, if that's all right. So many critics say that AI will lead to greater inequality, and in particular, greater income inequality. I wonder what your thoughts on this are, and especially if you have any suggestions for what we should do to prevent that.
Well, let me observe that globalization probably does lead to inequality, because you can imagine if you have a global market, global competition, you have global winners. Those global winners will get more of a share than the sort of equal to the sum of the regional winners before. So you can imagine one winner. This is sort of the NBA salaries principle. So there's lots of reasons to think that globalization has contributed to inequality, and I'll let the economists talk about the specifics there. It's not clear to me that technologies which make everyone smarter also increase inequality. It is probably true today that the more educated can use this technology, and therefore they'll get a greater wage gain. There's clearly an economic return to going to college, being highly educated. So again, a strong endorsement of our educational system, and you all in particular. To me, the question is, at what point does that break down? And I don't think we know. There's research going on here and in other universities to try to find where is the break point. We have this naive notion that everyone is fungible, but they aren't. There are some people that won't make it, but in my view, there's a very large number of people who will be able to use this, especially as the tools get more accessible.
Awesome.
Give an example. We and our competitors have these things like Google Home and Alexa. Right now, all of a sudden, computation is open to talking. I spent the weekend setting up my Google Home Mini, and I found myself talking to my computer. And my rule for 40 years has been talking to your computer means I've gone insane. So you have it.
Well, I talk to my computer all the time.
Well, then join the club.
I'm very happy to be in the club. Any questions from the audience?
We have a couple of mics here.
Otherwise, I'll keep going.
After lunch, it's important to have
Jennifer.
questions from the audience. Yes.
So when you were talking about, giving all this money to help train people, and that it's important that people learn how to use the tools that are out there, one of the things that you could do with the 1 million hours of Googlers' time is to try to make it easier for the average person to learn things. I mean, when search started out, we all had to get trained on how to search, and now, right, and so actually the search engine was changing us more than we were changing the search engine, and it flipped when you had enough data. So are you thinking about how to use these projects to bring in a lot of data and personalize the training so that, the AI walks much of that last mile rather than the individual?
Yes, but not in that program. There's a separate set of initiatives that go something like this. The smartphone that you use is a derivative of the WIMP interface, Windows icon menus and pull downs, that was invented basically in 1969, 1970, 1971. So you're using a user interface that's almost 50 years old, right? There must be a better way, and there's quite a few people in the research community that are looking for AI-driven interfaces that remain, for example, everybody here uses a smartphone in the same sense, and similarly for computers. So my guess is that your point's correct, but it'll be achieved through product improvements, which are desperately needed.
Let's take a question from this side.
Hi, thank you for being here. One thing I've noticed is many of the panelists have taken it almost as given that a decline in the number of jobs or the amount of work is a negative thing. I was wondering what you think about the shifting role of meaning in people's lives, what else people might do if jobs do go away.
Well, first place, there's a great website that charts the changes in the work week from roughly 100 hours in more than 100 years ago on the farm to the standardized 40-hour week in the US, similar number of hours in other countries. And it turns out it wasn't a linear path. There were nonprofit groups, there were activists, there were laws, there were fights, there were unions and so forth to bring us down to where we are today. So that 40-hour week was not sort of standard throughout life history. In fact, it's a relatively new idea. So one argument is that as people become more productive through automation, they will work fewer hours for same or greater income and be happier. The limit to me to that argument is that, and I think this is missed by most economists, is that for most people, work is identity, and identity is very important. So in order for the work week to materially decline as a percentage of people's life, they're going to have things aside from internet surfing and playing with video games, right, as their own identity. How do I make the world a better place? How do I serve others? I can imagine lots. That problem has to get solved.
Thanks.
We have time for one more quick question.
Okay, I think this adds perfectly. So, hey, I think I represent maybe more a younger generation here, and what I'd love to hear from your side is, how do you imagine the human future of work?
Well, I think the truth is we collectively like to work, right? Because it is this identity thing. And I'm assuming that in the future, you'll have an office which is sort of built around, office or workspace that's built around you, right? Both verbally and in terms of human cues, and sort of gets you. And that one of the things that's going to happen fairly soon is that there will be these ubiquitous personal assistants that will be highly trained to what you need and will be like having your own personal assistant, so that you as an individual can be enormously productive, right? You know, what to do, where to go, what decision support systems and so forth. That will improve productivity a great deal.
And what kind of skills do you see will, I don't know, be needed in this time?
There's an increasing need in analytical skills and in data science skills, and I think that's going to continue. When you have the sort of explosion of data, you need people who can think about data, both negatively and positively.
Thank you so much.
So thank you all very much. Let's thank
thank you
Eric
all.
for inspiring us to think about making
Thank you,
everyone
Daniela.
smarter.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, thank you all.
I'm back.